There's something deeply unsettling about hearing a knock when no one's at the door. But what if that knocking came from inside your walls, persistent, rhythmic, impossible to ignore? These aren't stories of faulty pipes or animals in the attic. These are true accounts from people who heard things that should not have been there. And when they finally decided to investigate, what they found was far worse than silence. Story 1. The apartment crawlspace. When Jasmine moved into apartment 3B, she wasn't expecting luxury. The old brick building on the edge of town was cheap, with cracked walls and a draft that seeped through the windows. But as a freelance illustrator with tight finances and a deadline looming, it was good enough. She liked the creaky floors, the chipped paint. There was charm in its age. The first few days were uneventful. Jasmine set up her workspace near the only window that let in decent light. The neighbors were quiet, the landlord gruff but helpful, and aside from the occasional scuttle of something in the walls, it was peaceful. Until the knocking started. It was soft at first. Just a tap, tap, tap from the left wall around midnight. She figured it was pipes or maybe mice. The building was ancient. But as the nights went on, the knocking grew more rhythmic, intentional. It didn't match the chaotic scratching of rodents or the hiss of plumbing. It sounded like knuckles. Knock, knock, knock. Always 3 taps, always from the same spot near the floorboard behind her bed. She tried ignoring it, wearing earplugs, playing white noise. Nothing helped. By the 6th night, it escalated. At 12:03 a.m., exactly, the knocking started. Louder, slower. She sat up in bed and turned on her phone's flashlight. She pressed her ear to the wall, heart hammering. "Hello?" she whispered, feeling stupid. There was silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. She recoiled. The next morning, Jasmine knocked on her neighbor's door. An elderly man named Henry answered with a wary eye. "Do you ever hear knocking at night? Like, from inside the walls?" Henry didn't speak at first. Then his eyes narrowed. "You're in 3B?" She nodded. He looked around the hallway, lowered his voice. "Girl before you said the same thing. Thought she was imagining it. Then she just up and left one night. Didn't even take her stuff." Jasmine asked if he knew anything about the building's history, but Henry shook his head. "Don't want to know." That night, she pulled her bed away from the wall and tried to sleep on the couch. But the knocking followed. Knock, knock, knock. Now it came from the ceiling. Then the closet. Then the crawlspace panel in the hallway. The crawlspace. She had noticed the small wooden hatch when she first moved in. Painted over several times, wedged shut. It was barely large enough for a person to fit through. The knocking continued, slow, mocking. In the morning, Jasmine called the landlord. He waved her off. "It's probably raccoons. Building's got critters. Don't worry about it." She offered to pay for an exterminator herself. He said fine, but seemed eager to end the conversation. The exterminator came, poked around, shrugged. "No sign of animals," he said. "No droppings, no nests. Nothing's been in that crawlspace for years, maybe decades." Jasmine stared at the crawlspace door after he left. Something was in there. That night, she couldn't take it anymore. The knocking started at 11:59, 4 minutes early. Closer now. She grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver, pulled a chair under the crawlspace panel, and began unscrewing it. With each turn of the screw, the knocking grew more urgent. Faster, louder, knock, 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 knock. When she loosened the last screw, the panel dropped slightly, dust puffing out. A cold, musty odor spilled from the gap. She hesitated. Then, gripping the flashlight, she pulled the panel open. The space beyond was narrow, dark, and full of insulation and cobwebs. She aimed the light inside. For a moment, there was nothing but silence and dust. Then she saw it. Fingernails. 4 long, pale fingers curling back into the darkness. Something retreated. Quick, deliberate. She screamed and fell backward, scrambling to her feet and slamming the panel shut. She nailed it down, covered it with a bookshelf, and sat awake all night with the lights on. The next day, she packed her things. The landlord didn't ask questions when she turned in the key. Weeks later, Jasmine looked up the building's address online. She found a thread on a forgotten paranormal forum. Old building. Used to be a halfway house. One guy vanished in the walls during a breakdown, never found the body, but every few years, someone hears him knocking. The last comment read, open quote, "Whatever's in the crawlspace isn't trying to get out. It's waiting for someone to let it in." Close quote. Story 2, The Inheritance House. When Claire's estranged uncle passed away, she didn't even know he had a will, let alone that he'd left her a house. She remembered Uncle Edgar vaguely from childhood holidays, a tall, twitchy man who never smiled and rarely spoke. Her parents never talked much about him after he stopped visiting. When she asked why, her mother would only mutter, "He chose to be alone." Leave it at that. So it came as a shock when a law firm reached out and told her she had inherited his house in the woods of Pennsylvania. She was 29, fresh out of a bad breakup, with no real job or direction. A free house, no matter how old or weird, sounded like an escape. Claire arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The drive was long, the trees dense and looming. The GPS cut out 2 miles from the house, and she had to rely on a printed map. When she finally pulled into the overgrown driveway, her heart sank. It was a 2-story colonial, paint peeling, shutters hanging loose, ivy swallowing one side of the structure. But something about it felt still. Not abandoned, but paused. As if it had been holding its breath, waiting for her. Inside, everything was dusty but untouched. Sheets covered the furniture, and the air smelled like mothballs and something older, like wet stone and rust. The living room held old books, strange framed photos of places she didn't recognize, and heavy antique furniture. The upstairs bedrooms were locked. All of them. Except for Uncle Edgar's. His room had a large leather-bound journal on the desk, and nothing else personal. No clothes. No toiletries. The bed looked like it hadn't been used in months. She flipped open the journal. The entries were scattered, rambling. Most were weather notes, observations about the house, vague references to them and the sounds. One entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, "Opened the knocking returned. It's worse this time. Closer. I fear I waited too long. The inheritance should pass before it to the wolves." Close qual. Close Claire. Closed the book, disturbed. That night, it began. She was in bed, an unfamiliar one in a stranger's house, when she heard it. Knock, 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 from inside the wall behind the headboard. Slow, deep, deliberate. She sat up, heart hammering. "Hello?" She said into the dark. Nothing. She got out of bed, pressed her ear to the wall. Dead silence. Just as she turned away, knock, 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 from the opposite side of the room. The next morning, Claire told herself it was old plumbing, or maybe raccoons, or a tree branch in the wind, anything but what she had heard. But the knocking continued, always after midnight, always 3 knocks, sometimes from the walls, sometimes from the floor. She tried exploring the locked rooms. None of the keys in the house worked. One door, the furthest one at the end of the upstairs hall, felt cold to the touch. She tried kicking it open, but it held firm. She called the law firm, trying to find out more about the house. The lawyer was evasive. "All I know," he said, "is that Mr. Edgar was very clear. The house cannot be sold. It must stay in the family. That's why you got it." Claire asked why. Silence. Then, he believed the house was watching, that it needed someone inside. That night, she stayed up with the lights on. Around 12:30 a.m., the knocking started again. Louder. Closer. She followed it through the house. It moved, from the living room to the basement door. She flipped on the basement light and slowly descended. The basement was surprisingly clean. Concrete floor, old workbench, dusty shelves. But on the far wall, behind a pile of broken picture frames, she saw something strange. A wooden section with dozens of tiny holes and hairline cracks, like something had been pressing out from the inside. Then, knock, 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 from behind that very wall. Claire backed up, heart thudding. Suddenly, the air turned cold. The light above flickered, and for the briefest second, she heard it. A voice. Whispered. From behind the wall. "Let us out." She fled up the stairs and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, desperate, Claire returned to the journal. One passage stuck out. Open quote. "Don't open the wall. Don't speak to them. The house is the lock. I am the key. With me gone, they'll knock louder. They need a new key." Close quote. A new key? She was the new key. Claire dug through the attic, hoping to find answers. Amid old trunks and yellowed newspapers, she found a set of iron tools wrapped in velvet and a photo album labeled Inheritance. Inside were black and white photos of family members she didn't recognize, each one standing in front of the house. Many looked gaunt, some terrified. On the last page was a photo of Uncle Edgar, older, hollow-eyed, standing next to the crawlspace in the basement wall. A handwritten note below read, open quote, "When you hear them knock, don't listen. When they speak, don't answer. Keep the door sealed." Close quote. Claire didn't know who they were, but she knew now that Edgar hadn't been insane. The house wasn't haunted. It was containing something, and now, with Edgar gone, the seal was weakening. That night, the knocking was deafening. Bam! 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 The cold radiated from the basement like a fog. She heard whispers in the walls, in the vents, under the floorboards. She heard her own name spoken in voices that weren't hers. Claire! Claire! Open it. In a panic, she grabbed the tools from the attic and returned to the basement. She boarded up the weak wall with nails and iron strips, not even sure why, only that it felt right. As she hammered the last board into place, a shriek rose from behind the wall, not loud, but low and vibrating, like a scream from the bottom of a well. Then, silence. The air warmed. The whispering stopped. The house once again was still. Claire never left. She stopped returning calls, stopped using the internet. She grew quiet, strange, but she kept the house standing. She repaired what Edgar hadn't. She kept the doors locked. She never opened the crawlspace. And every night, when the clock passed midnight, she sat in the basement with the journal in her lap and a hammer in her hand, waiting. Because now, she was the key. And they were still knocking. Story 3. The Nursery Wall. Maggie and Daniel had been trying to have a child for 5 years. When they finally adopted baby Emma, they felt like their world had been made whole. They moved out of their cramped apartment in the city to a spacious 1920s house in the quiet outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. The moment Maggie saw the pale blue room upstairs with a wide window and antique crown molding, she knew it would be the perfect nursery. They spent weeks decorating it, hand-painted clouds on the ceiling, soft pastel curtains, a vintage white crib by the window. Everything was perfect, until the knocking started. It was faint at first, just a soft, rhythmic tap from behind the far wall. Maggie first heard it when she was rocking Emma to sleep around 9 p.m. She paused the rocking chair, held her breath. Nothing. She chalked it up to the old bones of the house settling. The next night, it happened again. Same time. Same gentle knock, knock, knock. Always behind the same wall. Daniel, ever the rational one, dismissed it as old pipes or rats. But the knocking became more insistent. It changed rhythms, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes it seemed to follow the lullaby Maggie hummed. And it always came from the same spot, the nursery's back wall, directly behind the crib. Maggie moved the crib to the other side of the room. That night, the knocking followed. The sound now came from the wall behind the new crib location. That was when her unease turned to fear. One evening, Maggie brought it up to their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Keene, while they were chatting over tea. "You moved into the old Holloway house?" the woman asked, her eyes narrowing. "Yes." "Why?" Mrs. Keene stirred her tea slowly. "That house's nursery hasn't been used in decades, not since the last baby who slept in it died." Maggie felt a chill crawl down her spine. They found the child blue in the crib. No explanation. And the mother said she heard knocking every night from the walls. Daniel wasn't convinced. He pulled out tools the next weekend, determined to put an end to Maggie's growing anxiety. He inspected the crawlspace, the attic, even removed a section of the drywall behind the crib. That's when he found it. A small, sealed-off cavity between the walls, no bigger than a coat closet. Inside it were tattered baby clothes, yellowed with age. A broken mobile, and worst of all, what looked like a crib leg, snapped in half and stained dark. Maggie wanted to call the police, but Daniel insisted it was just leftover junk from the previous owners. They resealed the wall. That night, the knocking didn't come from the wall. It came from inside the closet. At first, it was just a single thump, then a series of rapid knocks as if tiny fists were pounding from the other side. Emma screamed in her crib. When Maggie rushed to pick her up, the door of the closet creaked open by itself, even though Daniel had wedged it shut with a chair. They didn't sleep that night. Daniel, pale and shaken, finally agreed to bring in a home inspector and a priest. The inspector found nothing unusual structurally. The priest, however, refused to enter the nursery after standing silently in the doorway for less than a minute. "There's something residual in that room," he whispered. "Something that wants to be noticed." They moved Emma into their bedroom that same night. For a week, the house was silent. Until one night, around 3 a.m., Maggie woke up to Emma staring wide-eyed at the door. Maggie followed her gaze and saw the faintest silhouette of a child standing just outside the bedroom. She screamed. Daniel jumped up, turned on all the lights. Nothing there, but they both heard it, echoing down the hallway toward the nursery. Knock, knock, knock. That was the final straw. They moved out within a month. The house went back on the market. The nursery, still painted in soft blue, was sealed shut. They told no one what really happened. But every so often, Maggie checks the listing online, and in one of the newer photos staged by a real estate agency, she saw something in the background, just behind the crib, a tiny handprint smudged on the inside of the nursery wall. Sometimes, the scariest sounds aren't screams or howls, but a quiet, deliberate knock in the night, a reminder that something or someone might be waiting just beyond the walls we trust to keep us safe. If these stories taught us anything, it's that not all noises can be explained, and not every wall is empty. Sleep tight, and if you hear knocking tonight, whatever you do, don't knock back.